Prophets versus Empires.
This podcast was originally recorded in Hebrew and features AI-generated English dubbing. The voices are not those of the original speaker.
Recap of Chapter 5. The righteous, the logic that the intellect cannot understand. In the previous episode, we unveiled the mysterious power of the righteous, those hidden individuals who sustain the world. We discovered why Jeremiah searched desperately for just one righteous person to save Jerusalem, and why Abraham negotiated with God to spare Sodom and Gomorrah. The righteous aren't leaders or public figures, but pure souls without ego, often found on the margins of society. Their remarkable power comes from channeling the divine power in its original purity, creating a concentrated force far stronger than the dimmed power channeled by the masses. We learned that quality matters infinitely more than quantity in spiritual matters. A small number of righteous ones could have prevented catastrophes throughout history by delaying or weakening the karmic effect upon an entire population, just as pure water dilutes polluted water to a level where the pollution becomes negligible. This principle operates beyond intellectual understanding, revealing why the statement, "The righteous is the foundation of the world," contains profound cosmic truth.
Chapter 6. The End of Days and the Days of the Final Judgment. Closing all karmic cycles for everyone in the world at the present time. Why is this happening now throughout the world with unprecedented intensity? After all the explanations given here, we can now summarize and answer this question, along with the remaining questions we posed at the beginning of the lecture. Throughout thousands of years, many prophecies have proclaimed the end of days or the days of the final judgment. They reached all nations and all corners of the earth through prophets who were chosen for this mission because of the maturity and purity of their spirit. We could devote more than one lecture just to these prophecies, but today we will mention, as we continue, only the most important and famous among them, which is the Book of Revelation. All the declarations about this period warned and urged human beings to abandon the dangerous paths they were treading, as all these paths would end in terrible defeat. However, this period, in and of itself, was not supposed to be so catastrophic, and the phrases "end of days" and "the final judgment" were not meant to evoke fear and dread in the hearts of everyone who hears them. On the contrary, they could even herald a wonderful conclusion to an era, because, in essence, the end of days means a period when planet Earth enters its final stage. This is in accordance with the natural life cycle that applies to everything material in creation. The stages of beginning, development, and disintegration are necessary phases that every tree, every animal, every human body, etc., go through, as well as planet Earth and all solar systems, in order to prevent stagnation and bring about revitalization and renewal. Therefore, if we had perceived our time on Earth as a school for the development of our spirit, we would have reached the finish line of the end of days in a state where we had completed our developmental path, because we were given thousands of years for this purpose. And for us, it could have been a time of one great spiritual celebration. We would have earned a graduation certificate from creation, and when the time came to shed our physical body, given to all of us merely as a temporary cloak, we would have returned home to paradise as completely conscious spirits. Then we would have fulfilled the purpose for which we have arrived here, to the world of matter. However, since humanity's conduct and development over thousands of years has been contrary to the laws of creation, since in its stubbornness and arrogance it refused to listen to all the messengers sent to it from the light, Since all messages from the light were distorted into religions, and since even people who were considered good people have actually disconnected from their spirit and become beings with only a material consciousness. The judgment of the end of days is a particularly painful event in which all of humanity reaps only suffering. We are therefore in the midst of a global event, not because the globalists planned it, but because they are merely executing a much larger plan that has existed in creation since the beginning of time. Here lies the answer to the question, why is this happening now throughout the world with unprecedented intensity? Let's continue to the next questions. Where is God? Where is justice? If you've made it this far, then you already know that God does not personally intervene in creation, but rather His perfect laws of creation, which express His will, are the ones that truly embody divine justice. Therefore, even in this period of the closing of karmic cycles, the judgment occurs according to the laws and not on a personal basis. The pressure of the power of the light, which we also discussed during the lecture, is steadily increasing and exposing everything that exists within humanity, within every nation, and within each person. This pressure of the light, functioning like a greenhouse effect, causes all karmic cycles to close rapidly, bringing to each person's doorstep the harvest of what he has sown throughout all his incarnations. Therefore, anyone who speaks of injustice is simply someone without a spiritual consciousness, viewing this entire cosmic event through the distorted lenses, remember them from the beginning of the lecture, of their emotional and intellectual consciousness, which are limited by time and space. The concept of the resurrection of the dead, which most of us have heard about, and which is also connected to the prophecies of the days of the final judgment, does not mean that the dead will rise from their graves and awaken, as this contradicts the laws of creation. Rather, resurrection of the dead means the revival of everything that is dead within, the revitalization of everything in creation that remains motionless, so that it will stand in its full vitality in the divine judgment. In practical terms, this means that everything that has lain dormant within us, as if dead, and that we often weren't even aware of, will awaken and strengthen under the influence of the power. And then, if our spirit aspires to ascend, the power of the light will strengthen it. But if we deny it and insist on clinging to the material consciousnesses, that same power will lead to our demise. The term apocalypse, which usually carries connotations of destruction, ruin, and the end of the world, in its original Greek meaning, signifies nothing but revelation, disclosure, or exposure. The exposure of the truth. The intensified power of the light in the days of the final judgment is also the true reason why all corruption is being exposed and nothing can remain hidden. Everything is coming to light. However, remember that this great revelation is occurring not only externally, but primarily within the innermost being of each person. In both cases, we cannot escape our responsibility for all that is happening. We have no one to blame but ourselves, and the only way to be saved from the karma rolling toward us with increasing speed and might is to correct our ways. Therefore, every moment we have on earth is now more precious than gold. Moreover, those of us who begin to view this period through the lens of spiritual consciousness will experience specifically this time as the most beautiful and as the most profoundly meaningful in our lives. And then, even as the false world crumbles around us, the light will forge new and wonderful paths for us. Paths where, as you walk, you will experience miracles upon miracles. Yet, even the suffering humanity is experiencing may lead a small portion to spiritual awakening, for it is precisely comfort for the body, intellect, and emotions that can cause paralysis of the spirit and even spiritual death. Hasn't each of us experienced challenging times and crises that actually led to growth? For many of us, wasn't the COVID period a time of great awakening? While the intellect and emotions found it difficult to uncover the world of falsehood. For the spirit, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to initiate change. During the lecture, we explained that divine justice cannot be fully comprehended or perceived within the scope of a single earthly incarnation. And now we add another characteristic. Divine justice is not directed toward what is comfortable for the earthly body, intellect, and emotions, but toward what benefits the spirit. Therefore, from the higher perspective of the light, everything supports our spiritual development, even the greatest of suffering. The intellect and emotions naturally cannot grasp this concept, as they prefer to silence the spirit and continue living in comfort. But for the spirit, the collapse of both the external and internal matrices may be the only remaining chance for liberation. Of course, this does not mean that spiritual development necessarily involves suffering. On the contrary, if we had developed according to the will of the light, we would have experienced health, peace, and prosperity. But because we have strayed from the right path, suffering has become the only way left for us to awaken and change direction. Where is God? In light of everything we've explained, the question is not where is God, but where are we? The real question is, how has God not completely forsaken us, given all our transgressions and distortions, as humanity over thousands of years? Why doesn't the light conquer all this darkness? To answer this question, we must first properly define what darkness is and what light is. Almost all humans define the darkness as something bad, as it is perceived by their intellectual and emotional consciousness. But in truth, darkness is everything that binds and shackles the spirit to the material world and prevents it from ascending. In other words, darkness exists wherever there is the aspiration to see the material world as the purpose of human life. This is instead of seeing planet Earth merely as a school for the ascension of the spirit, so that it can return to paradise as a conscious spirit. Therefore, illness may be perceived by the two material consciousnesses as darkness and health as light, while for a suppressed spirit, the definition would be exactly opposite. It is precisely illness that may cause spiritual awakening. I am reminded of my late father, who through the severe suffering of his cancer disease was able to connect to his spirit and to the deeper meaning of life. We've already explained at the beginning of the lecture that Lucifer's plan, about whom we could also give an entire lecture, was to bind humanity to the matrix of the material consciousness. From his perspective, everything that helps humans forget about their spirit and continue to aspire only to live quietly and financially secure in the dark world is valid. This also includes, for example, endless vacations and other distractions. This is exactly what it means to be in the darkness, although many people would define it as being in the light. Why? Because for most people, the light is everything that brings comfort to their body, intellect, and emotions, and allows the freedom to do whatever they want. But Lucifer did not create evil. He only tempted human beings to enter the dark path where there is no light, and there, they alone created evil. Because darkness means only the absence of light. Absolute darkness is actually nothing, because there is no presence of light in it at all. However, the moment we move away from the light, evil is created. There is another important point that needs to be mentioned, which addresses the questions we posed above. Those who wait for the light to come save them and look for a savior in human form do not truly understand the ways of the light. The light illuminates. Whoever wants to see and awaken will save himself. The light sends messengers to show the right way. Whoever recognizes them and strives to adapt himself to their guidance will be saved. Even the Messiah was not meant to bring automatic redemption, as the churches wrongly have taught their believers. Rather, he only showed the path to redemption, a path that each person must walk on his own if he truly wants to be redeemed.